Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another live virtual event from Potential Workforce, where we hear from experts, employers, self-advocates about their experiences and recommendations on how we can improve employment outcomes for neurodistinct professionals and improve the world of work in the process. I'm Dave Thompson. I'm Director of Strategic Programs for Potential Workforce, and as always, super stoked to be here. We support companies in becoming more neuro-inclusive, as well as recruiting neurodistinct talent into specialized roles within those organizations that are truly walking the walk. Today's conversation, though, is on a topic that's very important to me personally: accommodations and success enablers, specifically for neurodistinct employees and thinkers. As we know, as long as you're employing more than a couple of people, chances are that there are autistic people within your teams, dyslexic people within your teams, ADHDers within your teams, and the list goes on. Today, we're going to be talking about best practices and strategies for creating an inclusive workplace that supports the unique strengths and abilities of all of us. And for that, we've brought on an awesome, incredible panel of experts in the space who I'll let introduce themselves in just a moment. Just some housekeeping before we get started. The chat, the cameras, the mics will all be turned off for the attendees just due to the size of the webinar. Please feel free to use the Q&A feature for questions, and we hope to get to all of them. If not, we're happy to follow up with any and all of you. And as always, we do a bunch of these. If we could do anything better to make your experience more valuable, more meaningful, please feel free to reach out and chat with us after the fact. And we'd love to hear from you. And with that said, I would love to introduce or allow our panel to introduce themselves. Marilyn?
Hi, everyone. So I'm Marilyn Briand. My pronouns are she and her. I work with Ubisoft as a talent acquisition manager. I've been with them for over 4 years now. And more recently, I've been working on diversity and inclusion, as well as more specifically our neurodiversity program. Interesting fact is I am dyslexic, so I've been advocating about dyslexia for the last couple of years. And the reason behind that is because it's really shaped me into the person that I am today. I've made a lot of really costly mistakes in my career and some funny mistakes throughout my career. And really talking about my dyslexia has helped me hone my strengths, but also talk about my limits. And working in human-centric environments really, and mainly creative environments, has allowed me to talk about my needs and my accommodations and what people could do to help me. And that's why I wanted to be a part of this panel today to really help debunk notions around accommodating employees and help people understand some of the benefits of accommodating employees, because a lot of people underestimate how accommodations work and the effort that you need to put in them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marilyn. Thank you for being here. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really excited. My name is Chris Grous. I'm a business development director at a company called Texthelp by trade. For anybody that doesn't know Texthelp, we're actually a global assistive technology vendor, and we specialize in software tools to support both neurodiverse learners and workers. So very relevant and topical to the conversation today, and we'll chat about that a little bit. About me personally, I actually am very recently diagnosed ADHD within the last year, but definitely have felt it in some way, shape, or capacity for a lot of my life, and just not necessarily known what it was. But to be quite honest, it answered a lot of questions. I had a lot of struggles both in my educational and my professional career coming up, and I think I always found ways through it. But a lot of times, I would find myself asking the question: is it this hard for everybody? And recently, I found out no. In fact, it might not be. But after I got the diagnosis and I started really talking more about it, I think what was really helpful was, being able to really look at the strengths of ADHD and be able to, be honest about where my challenges or my weak points or my areas for improvement are, as opposed to trying to constantly fit a round peg into a square hole. So yeah, excited to be here.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks so much. And Jeff, I know you. Go ahead.
Yes, yes. Hi, everybody. Jeff Miller. I'm the founder and CEO of Potential Workforce. I've been in human capital for a couple of decades now. Managed some pretty large teams at various times during that journey. So the people management side is something that I've been involved in directly. Sometimes not very effectively, as you'll hear, as I'll share some stories later on in the hour. But I've learned a lot and have had a front row seat for what a lot of companies have done as a staffing industry professional for all that time, to see how companies are supporting individuals who bring different strengths to the table, and that those, like Chris said, those organizations that lean into a strengths first approach, how powerful that is and what that can unlock for you as an organization. So really excited to be here. Happy to be joining in this conversation, and looking forward to learning a lot from our great panelists today.
Awesome. Cool. So let's dig right in. Chris, the story of late diagnosis or new diagnosis in adults is such an important one. It's not my story, but it's a massive one. And I would love for you to kind of speak to that, and speak to, how important has it been that your employer is a neuro-inclusive one, that your employer understands and values accommodations and a supportive work environment that sets you up for success?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think to answer it quickly, it's incredibly important. And I think to talk a little bit about my experience previously, I know I had been doing in my previous roles and previous companies a lot of masking, and not knowing what it was at the time, but just feeling like I was burning the candle at both ends to get work done, and then also, try to maybe not have everybody see how disorganized I felt or how not on top of things I felt. And I didn't realize how exhausting and challenging it was, not only in my 9 to 5, but then I was bringing that home with me every night, and the stress was compounding, and it was making it harder to, really be in the moment at home and be present with my daughter. So I think working for an employer and, understanding what it means to be neurodiverse and what that, and just really being able and feeling comfortable to talk about it, I think has been kind of an enormous weight lifted, and allows me to remove a lot of that excess cognitive load that I think goes into masking, and really allows me to focus that more on my work, and then when I'm done with work, be able to leave that at my desk and go home and really just be present in my personal life as well.
I love that. I like that you started with the before you were at a neuro-inclusive employer. And I got to say, when you said burn the candle at both ends, I had to look down at my arm, because I have a new story that I've never told on a webinar or anything before. Here's my burn the candle at both ends tattoo. And when I got that, I think we all know what it means, right? I was burnt out. I can totally identify with the idea of feeling guilt at home and guilt at work, and not feeling like you're getting spending enough time on the right things within either, right? And but at the time when I got that tattoo, I really blamed me, and just like the way I worked, or where my priorities were, or whatever. And now that I'm really in an environment that allows me to do what I need to do to get what I need to get done, and do it as me and show up as my best self, I don't need that tattoo anymore. I mean, it's pretty cool looking, but I don't need it. So that really resonates with me. And so Marilyn, same question for you. Like, on a personal level, you've been with a number of organizations, and I know you've been an incredible voice for the dyslexic experience through your newsletter and things like that. On this journey, how important has it been? And what's the difference been between having a neuro-inclusive environment versus one that's not so much? And how important is it that your company Ubisoft is inclusive of your brain and how it works?
So it actually took me quite some time to figure out that I needed to be in inclusive environments, and typically the creative industry welcomes you as you are. It's one of the main pillars of a lot of the creative industries. And I think that's why I always tend to end back up in gaming companies and whatnot. And the reason for that is the inclusivity and the neuro inclusivity is, like Chris said, I don't have to mask, I can be myself. And being myself allows me to provide my best work. Those are the environments. Because I was able to be myself, I was able to thrive and I was able to grow as well. I was able to put words on my needs. Simple things like, what tools did I need, right? I needed specific tools. Are you able to give me these tools? Which at the end of the day made me more efficient in my work and made me provide better quality work. So it really comes down to having that human-centric approach and really having empathy towards me and my needs and listening to my needs, which has helped me grow throughout my career.
Yeah, totally. Me too.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine how important that is in a creative environment, to be understanding of what people need to do to be set up for success.
So obviously I talk about like the success, but in environments where there was not inclusivity or neuro inclusion, those are the environments where I made the biggest mistakes, right? Or the cost of the mistakes I made were huge. So it's the pro and con. You see really both sides.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've seen that time and time again. So now, Jeff, if you could, I know in your introduction you explained that you've had a lot of experience in staffing and recruiting globally.
I'm an old guy. That's pretty much what that was.
That I didn't want to say it, but your words, not mine. So from the perspective of someone who's been in the game, and from the perspective of an employer, what have you learned over time about the importance of supporting employees in what they need to succeed?
Yeah, I think at least in my experience, you learn maybe more from the situations that you really seriously mess up than the wild successes that you've had. So that question makes me think about my first formal assignment as a manager, and I was in my mid-20s, and I was coming out of Boston, and the company sent me to Silicon Valley, of all places, to open up an office for them, and it was a fantastic opportunity. And I somehow, even though I'd had really great mentors and coaches along the way, I somehow had this idea, maybe it was just the stupidity of youth or what have you, that I had to have all the answers, but I couldn't show any vulnerability. And so as a result, the people who worked for me didn't show any vulnerability. And that I treated everybody exactly the same, even though there were folks were motivated by very different things, and we'd hired really smart people, but the things that motivated one, or the things that one needed, weren't necessarily going to be the things that another needed. And I was very sort of cookie cutter approach with this stuff. Ironically, I can tell you I really cared about my people, but I did not show it in a very effective way. And so ultimately, the business structure we were in and the company we were in was good enough to overcome my shortcomings. We actually had a decent measure of success, but I can tell you, I think we would have had a lot more success out of the gate, and I think we would have got there a lot more quickly if I, as a leader, had been more attuned to those types of success enablers, and creating the environment where folks felt like they could raise their hand and say to me, "Hey, Jeff, what if we went this way?" Right? But in those first couple of years, I just wasn't hearing it, and so that's maybe a cautionary tale, and I'm sure we'll get some more success stories as we continue to talk. But that's one that jumps out to me, and I remember somewhat painfully, actually.
Well, thank you for showing some vulnerability there, in talking about how you didn't used to show any vulnerability. Chris, same question for you from the perspective of a business or an employer. What have you learned over time about the importance of supporting employees in what they need to succeed? Maybe from before even your own journey with neurodiversity.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Jeff kind of hit it on the head right there, that you don't manage every individual the same, right? Neurodistinct or otherwise, everybody's functions differently, has different motivators. In a lot of cases, our brains work differently too. So I think the best managers, the best coaches, the best everybody are able to really get inside the head of their people and work with them and understand what motivates them, and really drive, use that to drive success and drive progress and innovation. So I think that's definitely the underlying principle. And then with regard to neurodiversity and some advice for employers, I think it's really the first step is understanding the breadth of the issue. Essentially, you kind of alluded to it at the beginning, Dave, that there are lots of us out there that are already within companies. And I mean, if you look at the general statistics, I think the most recent study I saw, somewhere between 17% and 33% of American adults are thought to be neurodiverse. And that's really based on self-reporting and actual clinical diagnoses. So you can estimate that the actual number is probably even higher than that. And I think what's especially challenging is because it's not a visible thing, and masking is kind of inherent to the condition due to the circumstances. In a lot of cases, it does in a lot of cases cause employers to kind of underestimate the issue or underestimate the area of impact within their own organization. And I think that's kind of step one in terms of, kind of really being able to support employees is understanding who you have working for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And understanding that maybe you don't need to know the details, right? Of who, right. That they're just there, and that it doesn't matter why so much, but it matters what people need to be set up for success, to be given autonomy and space and flexibility, empathy, understanding. I talk to people all the time, obviously, about this stuff, and a lot of people reach out that don't talk about this stuff publicly at all, including people in the space that say, I don't talk about it, but of course I'm autistic, but I work for a Fortune 100 company. And, so I talk about neurodiversity, but I don't talk about my own neurodiversity.
Sure.
So the stigma is something we really, really need to get through. But in understanding that it's there, in understanding that everyone also comes from all different cultures and socioeconomic backgrounds and things like that, where maybe diagnosis didn't happen for them, or maybe that self-realization didn't happen for them yet. Neurodiversity is all of us. And there's plenty of neurodistinct people everywhere you go. So it's something really big to kind of for people to wrap their heads around when we talk about neurodiversity at work, and they think that necessarily means a hiring initiative of autistic people in tech, right? And that's not what it means. I mean, that's included, and those are important, right? But it goes well beyond that. Understanding that everyone has a different kind of mind, and that's to everyone's benefit in the workplace. And so this is a really quick moving space. There are new words and terms and realizations all the time about this field and how to set people up for success. There's a newer term that I'm really excited about, and it's in the title of this webinar: success enabler. I want to talk about success enablers and what that means and what it does for neurodistinct professionals. So Marilyn, could you speak to this new term, success enablers, and what it really means?
Totally. So for me, it's a tricky word because it means a lot. For me, it's a ton of different factors, strategies, tools that really help individuals succeed. And obviously neurodistinct, but it really encompasses everyone when we think about it, right? So at the beginning of success enabler, I also kind of tend to attach it with having that safe space, I think that's the first step. Jeff kind of spoke about it, of having people open up and ask questions and feel comfortable asking questions. Well, you can't have success enablers if you're not providing that safe space for people to ask for questions, or to ask for specific things, or to ask for specific strategies or tools. And so for Neurodistinct, having success enablers internally, it really allows us to unmask, and it allows us to put forward our best selves as well. So to be your true self, and to put forward, in most cases, like it was my case, your best work, right? It allows you to focus on your strengths, and spend less time potentially finding strategies or ways to hide those limits, because you have the tools needed. So it's obviously worth putting some thought into, and it's the work of everyone to discuss it, right? Every individual has different needs, has different ways of thinking, and therefore will have different enablers that'll work for them. It can be specific assistive technology, it can be a specific setting, it could be remote work, it could be a ton of different things. So I think sitting down with your team and really understanding that each individual will have different success enablers, and we need to put forward different things to ensure their success, is definitely something organizations need to start doing a bit more actively.
I think that you touched on a few really important, because I like to get a little bit literal with this, because it's kind of a, like you said, it's a really big idea, right?
Yeah.
And so when I start rattling off success enablers, usually I talk about the physical ones that are right in front of me, like this one in my hand, which is not just in my hand because of this webinar, right? It's in my hand all the time. Or this one, or my LED lights, or my standing desk, or my 2 monitors, or my timer, right? I talk about the easy, simple ones, which are important, but it's also software, which I'm sure Chris will get to. It's also you know, just the way your day-to-day work experience is set up, like getting meeting notes after a meeting, or something like that. That could be something that's not part of your workplace culture, that could really mean the difference between a meaningful and productive experience and one that's not so great, right?
Totally. And I'd add, like, you're fidgeting with the toy, with the stress ball, it's to remove the stigma around it as well. It's completely normal to do it, and oftentimes we feel judged for whatever tactics we have. So for me, a success enabler as well is to not question whatever means the person puts forward to feel comfortable at work, right? So it's a large term that means a ton.
Yeah. Yeah. And so let's take it to Jeff for a moment. This new term, success enabler, what does it mean to Potentia, and what does it mean for a lot of professionals, including Neurodistinct professionals?
Yeah, I think when we started looking at it, we really started from a place of looking at how accommodations have been managed and dealt with for decades, and the large amount of dissatisfaction that exists around those things, right? And that our view that, number one, you know, most of the things we're talking about here shouldn't require a doctor's note, right? And they shouldn't require months of analysis to figure out, right? A lot of this falls into the category of what we call that social contract between the manager and the worker. And the responsibility of the manager, again, within the corporate context, is to help do everything they can to create an environment where that worker, that individual worker, can be as happy and as productive as possible. And that might be a little different than another worker in another role, or another worker in a similar role, because we're all different, right? So I think, number one, you know, Success Enabler sort of wants to take it out of that sort of medical model idea of this is a deficiency, right? And think about it in a broader context. The broader context being, this is for everybody, because there's incredible variability among neurotypicals out there, right? You might have someone who's neurotypical who's really introverted, and they might have some things that they ask for to help them be as happy and as productive as possible in the work environment, right? It's not just the province of the neurodistinct, although we think a lot of folks in our community, really struggle and suffer when they aren't in an environment where they can ask for those things. Masking's been brought up a couple of times now, And I only know from the people who reported to me how painful it can be to have to do heavy masking all day, every day. And I'll just leave it there, because there are people who are much more qualified and could speak to that more directly. But boy, we want to get out of that scenario, right? We want to have that social contract in place, and it's just part of the overall discussion, right? Of tell me what's working well, tell me where you're doing your best, tell me, are there some areas of struggle that I can help support you with as your manager, and are there things we could do to make this environment, right, more happy and more productive for you. And that can, as we've talked, that can cover a whole variety of different areas. So I think it's also incumbent upon the manager there to get outside their own head and not just be thinking about what they would need to do the job, because that really isn't relevant, right? The individual who's working for them may be incredibly capable, may be better at the job than they used to be, but they may have certain ways that they're going to want to work. And when you allow those things, you get more engagement, more productivity. You also get more innovation, because allowing people to do things different ways, you come up with more creative solutions. So I know, and from my perspective, I don't want to be limited by my creativity. I hire really smart people, and I want to give them room to do what they do and do it best. And so I think success enablers is really a statement about your culture as much as anything else, and then putting processes in place that reinforce that culture as relates to this topic.
That's a great point, Jeff. And I appreciate, when you say you're not the expert on something like masking because you haven't lived the Neurodistinct experience. But let's give you some credit here. You've been in the game for a while, and you've employed hundreds of Neurodistinct people and been involved in hiring initiatives globally. And you're a trailblazer in this. He's not paying me to say this, but you're a trailblazer in the space, right? And you've learned a lot along the way.
I feel like this is going back to I'm old again.
Yeah. No. No. But for really, you probably have some more specific. We're speaking kind of generally, but to get a little bit more specific, can you speak to some of the real successes, breakthroughs that you've seen thanks to employers kind of rethinking what being a supportive employer looks like, or empowering their employees in this way?
Absolutely. I've been blessed to see hundreds of examples like this, but one that comes to mind is an individual that we started working with. Met him for the first time at a Starbucks. And it was a young guy, relatively recently out of school. He brought his mom, and he brought his caseworker. And what I quickly found out was that Chris was so shy, this individual was so shy, that he was really having trouble answering the questions that I had. His mom or his caseworker would answer those questions. And that was cool. And we worked together, and we sort of figured out where his passions lay and what he was really looking to do. And where he might be successful. We were able to connect him with the right company. And not only did he thrive in the internship environment, he was hired, and now he's on the leadership track with a Fortune 500 company. I should also say that same individual, not that long ago, I was invited to give a talk, and I invited Chris to come with me and to give part of the talk. And I want to tell you, he absolutely held that audience of 300 people and did a masterful job. And this is only a couple of years later. So again, we're not talking about trying to change who someone is, but or God forbid try to cure their autism, right? We're not going to do any of that. But we want to put people in environments where they can thrive and where they can do their best. And this was just and this individual did all the work themselves, right? But they were in an environment that wasn't so hung up on how he might show up in an interview. They wanted to get to know the underlying candidate. And their culture was all about figuring that out. How could this individual be most effective with us on day 1, on day 90, and then into their career path? So I've been super fortunate to have a front row seat to a number of these examples, and all credit goes to the individuals because they're the ones who are putting in the hard work. But also, it takes a company on the other end that's willing to maybe take a fresh look and try to put their biases aside and say, okay, this individual may be showing up for this interview and presenting a little bit differently than I would. Let me try and, you know, get underneath that, create the right safe space for them, but really uncover where this person's gifts are, where their strengths are. And you know, so credit to the employer, credit to that individual. But we're blessed to see examples like that every day, fortunately.
Yeah, yeah, I've seen many myself. Chris, what about you? What can you get a little bit more specific, whether it's you or without naming names, some examples of successes or breakthroughs that you've seen thanks to neuro-inclusive employers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, just to kind of piggyback off of what Jeff said, I think this is immensely important. Is just understanding that because someone presents differently than you're expecting or differently than you would, does not mean that they're not qualified. And I think there's a ton of unconscious bias out there in the world, especially in the realm of interviewing, that if somebody is fidgeting, that means that they're nervous or not answering honestly, or if somebody is not looking you in the eye, then that means that they're not confident, or, you know, not going to be good in the position. And I think it's crazy, like, just to kind of get into the specific example, I think it's crazy that, you know, kind of corporate work is one of the only areas where we expect people to be like great at everything. I played football my whole life. I would never, you know, and I've coached at points, like I would never take my fastest wide receiver, bring him down on the line and ask him to block a defensive end. It just, the skill sets don't match up, the capabilities don't match up. And when you think about it in that physical sense, right, it sounds ridiculous. So if you have an autistic employee, or you have you know, a dyslexic employee who's maybe you know, kind of interpersonal communication is not on par with what you would accept from, say, like a salesperson, but you have them in a software testing role, why does that matter? And so I think that's really to get into the specific success story, something it actually comes from EY, and it was something that I talked about and heard from Hiran Shukla, who's their head of Neurodiversity Center for Excellence. And what he talked about, what they've kind of done organization wide, and they do a ton of work, obviously, in terms of, you know, creating a neuro-inclusive environment, and they do you know, offer Texthelp tools within their organization, which I think definitely is a piece of this as well that's helpful. But they've created that environment where they've really normalized the conversation and removed a lot of the stigma. And because of that, they've now got all of their hiring managers thinking in terms of what he calls spiky profiles. And so what that means is, you know, essentially, if somebody's really good in the area that this job is specified in, but maybe they're, you know, not as strong in some of the areas that really don't have anything to do with this job, why would we not hire that person? And because of that, they've seen, you know, kind of increased productivity, you know, especially in things like you know, kind of pattern recognition and algorithms and things like that, where, you know, you put those really strong pattern recognition brains on those tasks, and you find really kind of innovative and productive solutions. So I think they've seen you know, significant productivity increases and a lot of innovation as well. And then one more story from SAP. I don't remember the employee's name, but I was talking with the person who leads their autism at work program, Sarah Lokes, and she was kind of sharing a story about somebody with autism that they hired in the finance department. And there was a report that he had to produce, I think weekly or monthly or whatever it was. I'm probably butchering the story, but the long story short is this report took so long to produce and was so you know, kind of extensive, that he basically just sat down and said, there's got to be a better way to do this. And essentially, basically, in just trying to solve this one problem, came up with their total new model for financial reporting internally that's used across all departments now. So it really is, I think, giving people the reins and trusting in the strengths and the skill sets. There's kind of endless possibility and potential when you do create that environment and you really work very hard to remove that unconscious bias, and I think trust the results rather than the process.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important what you're speaking about putting the individual in the driver's seat as far as what sets them up for success. I haven't applied for a job in a very long time. I've only helped to write my own job descriptions. And that just shows, I have plenty to offer the world of work. I know what I'm good at, and I know what I'd rather avoid, right? And there are things that I don't love that I have to do too, that I've figured out ways of mitigating. Like I do work a little bit with spreadsheets and things like that, right? But it really does allow me to bring my best self to work. And when you mention certain people being really, really good in certain areas, most job descriptions aren't, like you said, in the corporate world, not everyone's good at everything, right? And I know people who can do half of a task 10 times faster or more efficient or better than anyone else at a company, but can't or won't do the other half, right? And if the job description includes that whole task, then you're missing out on the possibility of that person contributing in really, really meaningful ways. So that's an important point. I'd like to ask you all more specifically around your companies, starting with Marilyn. Talk to me about what you're doing at your company to normalize a more supportive workplace that equips their team members with what they need to succeed.
So we're in the process actually of training worldwide talent acquisition, human resources, and managers on neuro inclusion at work. We recently completed the training for talent acquisition, and it was really, really great. In October, we're going to start with human resources and then follow up managers in January. So that is ongoing, and we've actually already started seeing results on the talent acquisition side, so really happy about that. Ubisoft has also been putting a lot of effort into our different programs, whether it's neurodiversity, whether it's diversity and inclusion. We also have a growing accessibility team, and employer relations is putting a lot of thought into the accommodation policy. So we're working on a comprehensive accommodation policy. And what's been really, really cool about this is they've consulted all the teams that I just mentioned, whether it's neurodiversity, accessibility, and so on. But they've also reached out to members of our ERGs. And that has been really, really great because it's open dialogue. It's made our communities feel like they're being listened to. And it's also raised awareness and representation internally. So I know that there's supposed to be more roundtables that'll be organized. And so it's a very human centric approach. And I'm super happy to see that. And so far, the results have been positive concerning that. So hopefully, hopefully the dialogue and will just continue, and we'll continue raising awareness and working on our programs.
Such exciting things happening at your company. It's been really, really neat to be a small part of and to witness. Jeff, what about you? What is your company doing to normalize a more supportive workplace that sets us up for success?
Well, I think internally we've got some tools that we've used that we've developed over time and refined over time that have been helpful. We've got a success enablers checklist. By the way, is by no means meant to be exhaustive. It's really meant to start a conversation, right? Just to let people know. We've had reaction from some workers who will say, "I didn't even know that was possible. You can ask for that," right? And so it's just sort of broadening out the idea of what we know can help people to be happier and more productive. We have something called the personal instruction manual that everyone on the team completes. And leaders are really expected to lead on that and show a bit of vulnerability, which Dave was teasing me about earlier. But it's really important, I think, that leaders demonstrate not like Silicon Valley, Jeff, 20 years ago, but hopefully the better version today. That I've got plenty of areas where I struggle and where I may lean on other people. And that just opens the door for conversations and makes, hopefully makes the folks on the team feel a little bit more comfortable, raising those issues. there are certain principles that underpin all of those types of things that we do. One of them is we're really not big on labels, right? We want to, if we say if someone shares a diagnosis, you want to be supportive of that, but that's really just an invitation to learn more to the extent that they want to share more, right? That doesn't mean that you can make all these assumptions about an individual just because they told you that they happen to be autistic, right? We see incredible diversity within neurodiversity, right? And so the no labels approach is a big one for us. So if we're looking at that tool, personal instruction manual, or we're looking at a success enablers checklist, there isn't anything in there that says, because I have this condition, I need this, right? It's not like that at all. It's just, I am a professional, and I know myself, and I know that, these are things that can help me be as happy and as productive as possible in your work environment. It's much more along those lines. Definitely strengths first approach. So in our conversations, we want to be leading with that, right? So if there are discussions about areas where someone could use some additional supports, it's within the context of their overall work within the company, what they like, what could be better, where they're killing it, right? Where they're crushing it and doing fantastically well, maybe where they're struggling a little bit, or just, again, within that context. And here's an area where I think if I had a support like this, I think it would really help me to be even that much more successful. Last thing I'll just say is we certainly learn a lot from the companies that we work with, and the training that we give and the best practices that we see that they've got in place. But when we train new hires as part of our STARS program, we have an empowerment training. And one of the biggest things that we do is coach people on self-advocacy, because I think it's important for all of us to understand that, just like we were talking earlier about masking and how that really can leave have a long-lasting effect on somebody. Working in environments that aren't particularly inclusive and neurodiversity friendly can have an effect on people, and may make them less likely to raise their hand. And so you may feel like you've got a great environment, but you may have someone coming into it who's had some bad experiences in their past. So it's up to us to even go that extra step further to create those environments where people feel comfortable to raise their hand, because a lot of people, just looking at the workforce today, have had experiences in the past where maybe they weren't working for a company that was as thoughtful as all the people who are listening to this. So I think those are some of the things that we're aware of, and some of the things that we're trying to do to move the ball forward.
Absolutely. And Chris, I should have asked you earlier to get into a little bit more into Texthelp and specifically around the employment related stuff, because I know you're in the education world as well. So what does your company do internally, and also for other companies around setting up everyone for success in the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for that. So I think internally it's two things. One, we just try to generally be, curious rather than judgmental, right? If somebody has a different way of doing things, or if somebody shares something about their condition, then, just be willing to learn more, as opposed to, kind of making assumptions about what that means for that person, and because of that, I feel comfortable talking about my ADHD, and knowing that people aren't going to think that I'm lazy or that I am disorganized. So I think that that's a big piece. And then the other big thing that we try to do, and I think this is huge, and this is applicable to every employer, wherever you can, make it so people don't have to ask. It really is accommodations, and even enablers. I think obviously it's definitely a better branding on the term, but I think that process in itself of feeling like you need to ask for something specific to do your job can, in a lot of times, be in itself alienating, and in a lot of times the opposite of inclusive. And so it's just, if you know something can be effective for some, then just offer it for all. Just the same way that you wouldn't, you don't necessarily see if there's any people in wheelchairs before you build a new headquarters building with a handicap ramp, or you don't ask how many deaf people are in the audience before you close caption the presentation, or have an ASL interpreter, for example. So I think I don't prefer to think of neurodiversity as a disability, but I think just in terms of a difference, right? If you know that there's certain things that people in your audience or in your company may struggle with, try to offer them tools that or make tools available that they can use without having to raise their hand and ask. And I think really that's what we're all about, especially on the employment side. At Texthelp, our main product and focus is Read and Write, the name of the product, which is essentially a digital literacy toolbar, which, true to its name, gives people all different kinds of options for how they choose to interact with, compose, and otherwise consume digital text throughout the day. So a lot of different options, a lot of different supports, and essentially it's obviously aimed at a neurodiverse person's brain, but we do see all kinds of usage, just like with the term just like the examples I gave of the handicap access ramp or the closed captioning. When you develop accessibility kind of universally, you do get much broader adoption and hit a lot of different use cases outside of the specific one that you're aiming at.
Yes, the curb cut effect.
Exactly.
Huge. So we've given a lot of great advice to employers, but now for a moment, I'm going to ask Chris and Marilyn, addressing neurodistinct professionals or job seekers specifically, that are unsure of what to do on their journey or unsure how to ask for what sets them up for success. Do you have any advice or any message to neurodistinct professionals and job seekers that are maybe in a boat that you were in a few years ago or something like that? Chris, you want to go first?
Sure. I think the biggest thing that I'm focused on now, and that I definitely have struggled with in the past, is really leaning into my strengths and knowing that that is what qualifies me for the role. And I think if I could go back and give advice to past Chris, it would be to seek out employers and to seek out kind of manager employee relationships that kind of give you that leeway and that freedom to do things in the way that is most effective for you, as opposed to what the kind of most typical way of doing it is. And so I think just for everybody out there that is struggling, just know that you have really amazing strengths associated with your neurodistinct condition, and that those and I think you alluded to this at the beginning, Dave, that those negative or challenges that you suffer with, they're not personality traits, right? It's just it's the way that your brain is wired, and nobody's perfect at everything. Nobody's great at everything. So I think just really focusing on the strengths, leaning into that, and trusting that the employer will be able to see that, I think, is huge. And then obviously, if you seek out people that do kind of present as neuro-inclusive employers, then I think you're going to have a better time than in some other situations. So
Definitely.
that's what I would say.
Marilyn, what about you? Message to, I know you speak to neurodistinct professionals both within your company and beyond all the time, right? But we haven't really focused much on that today. So what's your message or your advice to neurodistinct job seekers and professionals?
I think my advice would be very similar to Chris's. For me, self-awareness is really huge. So know what your strengths are, know what your limits are, read up on your condition. How can you potentially use it to your advantage? Because there's a lot of hidden strengths. I often say to each coin, there's two sides. So yeah, there may be limits, but there's probably strengths as well you can leverage. So try it and pull the best out of that. Like Chris mentioned, look for companies, and I kind of winked at this at the beginning, look for companies that are neuro-inclusive and that are inclusive. A lot of these companies, especially at the top Fortune 100, will demonstrate it and showcase it through their websites. So they'll talk about what they can offer, what accommodations they can have. If the company isn't, talk to your talent acquisition specialist as well. Most times they're rooting for you. They want you to get the job, right? Our job is to fill the job. So if you're going forward in an interview, feel free to reach out to them to see what is the company offering, and ask how they can maybe provide accommodations. Stats are going up as well for the request of accommodations at work. The last stat I saw was 61% raise in the last year of accommodation requests. So it's becoming the new normal. It's becoming common for employers to receive these requests. So I think we just need to keep pushing as a community and for it to become completely normal as well.
Definitely, definitely. I want to ask our last question to each of the panelists, and then I hope to get to a quick Q&A. We've gotten a lot of great questions. So now that we've given some very direct advice to neurodistinct professionals and job seekers, what about being more direct with businesses? If you could have a minute with decision makers at companies or people with plenty of swing, and they need to know how to become what to do next in their journey on becoming a more neuro-inclusive employer, what would you say, Chris?
Yeah. So I think from my perspective, it's a little bit of piggybacking on what I said before and kind of, what we're focused on here at TextHelp. And the biggest thing when you're thinking about accommodations or enablers is it's awesome that they're rising, but the sad truth is the majority of people out there, especially within the neurodistinct community, report not feeling comfortable asking their employer for accommodations. I think the most recent stat I saw was from an Accenture study that people with disabilities and neurodiverse conditions, around 76% said that they wouldn't feel comfortable fully disclosing their condition at work and wouldn't feel comfortable requesting specific accommodations. So obviously, when we're thinking about the percentage of people within our orgs already that are neurodiverse, and that 3/4 of them, regardless of the environment that we create, may not feel comfortable asking for support. I think that's really the message that I would give to employers is try to make it everything as inclusive as you can off the bat. So whether that's assistive technology being available to everybody, whether that's kind of employee resource groups that are available for folks to kind of seek out community on these different things. And then I think a huge thing is internal awareness and training too, to be able to, really alert us to our unconscious biases, and then ideally hope to move them off to the side.
Absolutely. Without comment, I will move on to Marilyn. Marilyn?
Yeah, so like Chris said, a lot of employees do not feel comfortable talking about their condition or don't feel comfortable asking for anything. So I would strongly put a focus on psychological safety, emotional intelligence, empathy. I think that goes a long way, and that's really for me the forefront of what we need to do. Making sure we're creating a safe space and there's no fear of repercussion from having these requests, right? I think maybe what I would add on that is if you can have somebody in upper management and executive be an ambassador and pave the way for others, I strongly encourage companies to leverage that. Having somebody in upper management be there and be the voice for people who may be afraid can go a long way, as well as to showing, hey, this is welcome at all levels of the organization. So I would definitely encourage employers to do that.
Agreed. Jeff?
Yeah, I just wrote that down. I love that idea. I was going to make a comment about leadership, but and I will. But Marilyn's point about someone at an executive level who can model that behavior, I think is just so important, right? People look for cues in terms of what's behavior that's acceptable or valued or appreciated. And like we said earlier, a lot of people are coming from environments where it hasn't always been received the best. Right. So I know there's a stat out there about 56% of all accommodations cost $0. I've also seen stats around 70 or more percent of individuals are hesitant to ask for the help that they need. I would just encourage leaders to think about what's the alternative, right? If people aren't comfortable and they aren't asking you for what they need to be successful, what's the cost of that to your business, right? So a lot of times we think about the cost of the accommodation. And by the way, if people aren't asking you about a simple accommodation that could help them be more productive, what else are they not sharing with you? That may indicate that you really don't know as much about your workforce as you might want to know. And again, what are the costs there? So maybe just framing that up a little bit differently. I would definitely coach leaders on open dialogue, psychological safety, as has been mentioned. we also need to outfit our leaders with and empower them with what are the non-negotiables from a company perspective. If the company has decided that everyone needs to be in the office 2 days a week, and that's corporate policy, and there's no room on that, then make sure managers are clear on that, right? So that they know. But then empower managers beyond those sort of very few, hopefully, corporate strictures, right? To let them run their teams and to give them some flexibility to meet individuals where they are and to come up with ways that those individuals can be as happy and as productive as possible. You will benefit from it greatly with a more engaged, more productive workforce. I know sometimes it can be a little scary because you don't know what you don't know if you haven't gone down this journey before. I would just tell you that your people feel how they feel, and you can either learn about it in an open dialogue like this, or you can hear about it in an exit interview. And I would recommend the former.
For sure. For sure. As usual, we're right up to the end because we're having such a great conversation. We did get a couple questions, and we'll make sure we reach out to any of the people we don't get to. But we got one from an anonymous attendee, so I want to make sure I get to that one. So for anyone, this question came in: how do you support ND employees that maybe don't know that they're ND without seeming like you are saying they are ND? I don't want to offend or assume.
I mean, obviously that's a tough scenario for sure. I think this is where I lean on things like employee resource groups, kind of being able to offer that community and things like that. But ultimately, I think it would be, how I would approach it if I were the manager would be assume as if they are without speaking about it, right? And just trust that if there are variances in their personality or things that may seem out of place from what's considered typical, to just kind of roll with it and really just try to focus on empowering what that individual does well.
Anyone else?
I'd also add, so if you don't know they're ND and they're struggling with one specific thing, they're struggling with writing, for example, and you may think they're dyslexic, why not say, hey, we have these tools, just letting you know, by the way, that we have these tools. I've seen that recently you've been having some struggles. If you want to talk about it, let me know, right? So it's also just providing flexibility regardless of the conditioning, not putting a label on it, but more putting on what you're seeing.
And you can also frame and include some of the things that they're having a lot of success with, right? And, through the context of, hey, really like this, the work you did here was really good. There was one thing I wanted to see if we could maybe offer some support on, and then you address that. And again, it has nothing to do with labels. It's about, just like Marilyn said, it's about the work product and you as a manager helping them to improve and maybe introducing some tools or some things that could help them. Sometimes that can open up a dialogue that leads to someone sharing something like that if they choose to, right? But them not choosing to share or even not knowing should not limit your ability to be a supportive manager.
Absolutely. And we're over time. We'll leave it at that. I want to thank Chris from TextHelp and Marilyn from Ubisoft and of course Jeff from Potentia for joining us. And we look for and of course everyone in the audience today. We look forward to continuing to broaden this conversation and do this again real soon. So thank you very, very much, and speak soon.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.